not. I mean, like I said, somebody told me like the science of how to pass it. If you know that, then is it really an accurate way to assess, you know, a potential employee? You understand what I'm saying? And
Hmm.
then after, living life and getting, exposed to this science, it's like, all right, whoa. You understand it? And matter of fact, man, when I was, just kind of in prep, real quick, I found this article. Um, Let me see. There we go. This article, right, on the myers-briggs test, right, and and that's one of the more popular ones that's out there. You understand what I'm saying? So, it's what personality are you? How the myers-briggs test took over the world. And I ain't gonna read the whole article. Y'all can go check it out. But it says deemed astrology for businessmen, for some lauded as life saving by others. The personality tests are a springboard for people to think about who they are, right? And a lot of people who are out there in the corporate world and stuff like that, man. I mean, like these things are gaining more steam, gaining more legitimacy or whatnot. Like what's your thoughts on just how they're being used right now, and just overall application. I know we're going to get into just the astrological aspect. We can blow that out the water, but just what do you think about why? You understand what I'm saying? The
Yeah.
Western world is gravitating towards this approach.
Well, you know, as the Western world begins to move further towards the East, because we live on a round globe. I know flat earthers have your theories, right? Right. I get
Right.
it, right? Right. But for right now, the general consensus, scientifically speaking, is we're on a round globe. And as the globe spins, right, where one space ends up, you end up in another space on the opposite side. So at some point, and even becoming a global society, right, it's just a
Right.
cross pollination of cultures, ideations, religions, and thought processes that it just is a matter of time until the West catches up with the East, right? And vice versa, the East catches up with the West because both bring very fundamental pieces to the table as far as man's development. I don't want people to think that I'm all East and the West is all bad. There's some definitely things that the East can learn from the West as well.
Right.
Um, but when you begin to look at how things work, right? Man as a Western entity is beginning to understand that when you have a large body of individuals called a corporation. The word
Mm-hmm.
corporation comes from the word corporeal, right, or core. That's why like any kind of core is a body, and if you want a body to function as a viable whole, you have to understand that there's roles and there's functions, right? There's
Right.
there's things that have to happen in order for this vehicle that's taking you from A to Z. It has to have some fundamental pieces in place. If not, you're gonna fail, right? And that's just uh, they're beginning to catch up, right? To understand that not everybody can do everything, and this is, I mean, really, it's common sense. But you know, coming from a blind perspective, it leaves you at a disadvantage to try to figure out as you go which person or which individual would best fit those roles. Where now they're realizing, hey, you know what? Maybe there's some kind of way, quote unquote, we can figure out who does what better. And I
Right.
get it, right? It makes sense. It would be pertinent to their success if they were to examine, right, some type of litmus test to face an individual with to get feedback on whether or not this person would be advantageous to add to the body.
Right.
So it makes sense, but what is missing is the fact that when we come through the door, right, we are not a amalgamous organism. We're not just a cell, right? We are, and they try to even talk about now work life balance, if you will. quote unquote, if that exists. I don't know if it does really, but they try to talk about this work-life balance where your work should be able to be balanced with the things that you have to do in a regular outside of work. And
Right.
um, you know it's at a point where you're trying to do something that's already been done, right? You're trying to do something that the universe has already pre-articulated, called destiny, and that destiny has a way of moving people into positions that best suit them regardless of their strengths or weaknesses. It doesn't really hone in on how to utilize someone's shortcomings. It's all about, a label. And, to reduce somebody to a label, we have multiple talents. We have many things that we can do well. And so that's where I find it to be biased in that regard. It doesn't hold water to really understanding the individual as a whole. It's trying to compartmentalize something that is much vaster than the logician or the what's the other one, they have 16 personalities in this thing, and the commander, right, the debater, right. You know what I mean? Like, where do you really go with that? If someone is a debater, right, but they're a poor public speaker, that doesn't do any good, right?
Right.
And you can see certain things in a chart that give you instant knowledge, right, as to whether or not the person can not only even debate, but if they can handle themselves in a large forum. They might have you as a good speaker, but a poor debater. And there's dynamics to the human spirit. There's more than just a pigeonhole to put us in, and that's where it misses the mark. So I understand where they're going with it. It makes sense, right? And it's interesting that you found that article that says it's now the astrology of the corporate world, right?
Mhm.
um, I find that very funny because and I even understand why they would use a system that is kind of separate from the stars, because as we always talk about on this show, on this podcast, Western astrology gives astrology a bad name, right? So you kind of have to have something that would yield or try to yield or produce some type of truth that aligns individuals with their best assets or their best abilities. But if we had the understanding, and the Western society had the understanding that astrology is a science, it is a science, folks. We do a lot of scientific analysis, a lot of work, a lot of case studies, just like doctors, just like, lawyers when they go do their research on cases to find, what the precedent is or which law they can use to override this law. Astrology is the same way, right? If you're a real
Right.
astrologer, you know? So I think in the future, maybe I would say 30 to 40 years in the future, right, when science finally catches up to trying to, because, if they can't measure it, then it's not true, right? That's what they try to say. Well, we can't measure the effects of the stars on human personality. Or they'll say, well, what happens if you have two people that have very similar charts or the same charts? Well, that's where you have to get into uh, um, the understanding of what background brings to the table, you know, in light of the astrology. It's not just the numbers. It's also, where do you live? If I have a person that has a chart out of India and I have a person a chart out of America, they're going to read very differently,
Right.
right? So,
Right.
at some point, hopefully, they'll catch up and realize that just because you can't necessarily measure, the light coming from this particular point in space, and you don't have a machine to do that, what machine do you have to measure these personality tests? You don't. The
None.
only
It's just data. It's just it will really require the same, not the same type of, but the way that they justify using the personality test for this. I mean, they could easily do the same thing for astrology in regards to looking at charts, looking at the same thing we do on this show or whatnot. Like like I have, you got a bunch of charts in your database. I got a bunch of charts in my database as well. And we can run analytics. You understand? I got different categories. I got a category for, people that's, engineers, people who are, wealthy, people are this, and you can see patterns. You understand what I'm saying? Amongst them, certain distributions, same thing they do with anything else or whatnot. But I think, one of the things is that like you just pointed out that Western astrology has given astrology such a bad name that it's not even looked at. It's overlooked, even though it's to me it's a far more superior tool. I mean, especially if you even broaden outside of even just with Jyotish, with Baza, and different
Mm-hmm.
things like that. You can know right off the back
Mm-hmm.
if this person is a productive. You understand? Is this person a good employee, or is
Mm-hmm.
this person a good manager? You understand what I'm saying? Is this you could see these things very clearly, objectively, without them answering any questions about anything or whatnot. All you need is those times, the right accurate time of birth and all that stuff like that, and you can see everything that you need to see. Especially relative, especially if you fine tune it down to just a job. You understand what I'm saying? Or positioning and stuff like that. You can see it right off the bat if you know what you're looking at.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and it's slowly becoming more integrated into society. One thing that I always remind people is that um, when you know who's running the society and who's running those powerhouses that own the corporations, right? There's a statement by J.P. Morgan that says that millionaires don't use astrology, billionaires do. And this is J.P. Morgan quoting this, you know, decades ago, right? So it's not something unheard of to know that corporate astrology is a very real aspect of how people use, high sciences, spiritual sciences to gain, to have great outcomes. Joey Yap, who is an individual I'm sure we're both familiar with, many of you may be familiar with as well. He's a bots astrologer in China, right? And I'm sure Chinese corporations, right, have hired him to do a lot of extensive data and research with a lot of data as far as really, is this person going to be able to facilitate this role, and if not, who can we put in their stead to work as a whole, as a corporation or as a corporate or as a body, to really best facilitate, right, the interest of the business. So it's becoming a lot more widely accepted. And the thing is that